A dark romance series, The Monster Who Owned Me Part 3. The woman on floor 17. There are two kinds of secrets. The kind kept to protect yourself, and the kind kept to protect someone else. The cruelest thing about love is that you cannot always tell them apart. Chapter 1. Her face violet. Floor 17. Sunday night, the first thing I noticed was that she wasn't afraid of me. Most people, surprised in a room they believe to be private, react with startlement, the physical vocabulary of the unexpected. A sharp breath, a step back, eyes going wide. She did none of those things. She turned from the canvas she'd been working on with the calm, unhurried movement of someone who had been expecting an interruption and had decided in advance how to receive it. She was exactly the woman in the photograph. Dark hair pulled back loosely, paint on her forearm cadmium red, the same color I'd imagined from the saturated brightness in the old photograph. Wearing clothes that were studio clothes, the deliberate grubbiness of someone who takes their work seriously enough to ruin what they're wearing for it. She was perhaps 32. Her face was striking in the way of faces that have been through something, not hardened, but clarified, the way certain materials are clarified by heat. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at the card still in my hand. "He gave you a key," she said. Her voice was low and even, accented slightly Eastern European, I thought, though I couldn't place it further. "He left it in my sketchbook," I said. "I assumed it was for the room I'd already found." She nodded once with the nod of someone filing information. "You're the artist," she said. "The installation." Violet haze. I paused. "You're Alina." Something moved across her face, not surprise, not quite. Something more like the expression of someone who has been a secret for long enough that being named feels like a different kind of exposure. "Vasek," she said. "Yes." The room was warm. Someone had arranged for it to be warm, had arranged for the art supplies stacked along the east wall, the small kitchenette in the corner with its coffee maker and its neat row of cups, the daybed against the far wall with its gray blanket, the books in the shelf above it. Someone had made this room livable. Someone had been maintaining it. "Long have you been here?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. 8 months. Numbers settled in the room between us. "In this room?" "In this building," she said. "Mostly this room." I looked around at the canvases stacked against the wall, at the supplies, at the evidence of an entire life arranged inside 400 square feet. At the window I'd seen her silhouette in, that night in the elevator, the figure I'd glimpsed and not been able to explain. "Does he know you're here?" I asked. The pause she took was very specific. The pause of someone choosing not between truth and lie, but between versions of the truth. "He knows," she said. She made coffee. This was unexpected, the hospitality of it, the domesticity, the way she moved around the small kitchenette with the ease of someone who has learned the dimensions of a space by heart. She set a cup in front of me and sat across the work table and looked at me with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who has been alone long enough to find social performance pointless. "You want to know what I am to him," she said. "I want to understand what's happening in this building," I said. "Yes." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "What has he told you?" "That you were here, that you left, both of which are apparently not true." A small, complicated sound, not quite a laugh. "He told you I left because that is what he wished had happened. It is easier for him to say than the truth." "Which is?" She looked at the window for a moment. The city beyond it glittered in its indifferent way, a million lives proceeding without awareness of this room, this conversation, this woman who had been a secret inside a building for 8 months. "The truth," she said, "is that I cannot leave, not because he is keeping me, because I am." She stopped. Her jaw set slightly. "I am ill. I have been ill for 1.5 years. The kind of ill that does not have good odds. The kind that requires treatment that is very expensive and very specific and that Adrian has been funding, quietly from the beginning." Room was quiet. "He found out 8 months ago that the treatment facility I was in was not." She paused again, choosing. "Not safe for me, not the environment I needed. He moved me here, to this building, where he could ensure the quality of my care and my safety without anyone." She stopped. "Without anyone knowing," I said. "Without anyone asking questions I could not answer safely." I looked at her. At the room. At the canvases I could see, now that I was looking, that they were extraordinary. Not the work of someone passing time, but the work of a serious painter, urgent and precise, the work of someone who paints because it is the thing that keeps the other thing from winning. "What is your relationship with him?" I asked. "Adrian." She looked at me with an expression that was tired and honest in equal measure. "He is the person who has kept me alive for 18 months, she said. He is not my lover. He has not been my lover for 3 years. He is, she seemed to search for it. He is the person who did not leave when leaving would have been easy. Silence stretched between us, full of everything that sentence contained. He was going to tell me, I said, not quite a question. Yes, she said. He told me about you 2 weeks ago. He said there was someone that he needed to tell her about me before it. She looked at me. Before it became the kind of thing that secrets destroy. I sat with that for a moment. He should have told me already, I said. Yes, she agreed. He should have. A pause. He is very good at many things. Telling people the things that make him vulnerable is not one of them. He has been learning. Her eyes were direct. I think you may be part of why. I looked at the coffee in my hands. At the woman across from me who was alive when she wasn't supposed to be alive. Who was painting in a secret room 8 months into a story I hadn't known existed. Who was looking at me with something that was not quite warmth and not quite warning but contained elements of both. I need to speak to him, I said. I know, she said. So does he. He's been awake since 2 a.m. She looked at the ceiling, at the floors above us, at the building above this room. He knows you're here. Looked up involuntarily, at the ceiling, at the camera I hadn't looked for but which was, now that I looked, visible in the corner, small, pointed at the door. He watches this room, I said. He watches this room, she confirmed. From his office, every night. It is a slight pause. It is how he manages the not knowing if I am all right, the distance between where he can be and where I need to be. Set down the coffee, I stood. Thank you, I said. For telling me. She nodded. She picked up her brush. She looked at the canvas, the unfinished thing, the red that was still wet, the image I couldn't fully make out. Violet, she said. As I reached the door, I turned. He is not a good man in the way that is simple, she said. But he is a good man in the way that matters, the way that costs something. Her eyes held mine. I have been watching him for 3 years. I know the difference. I went out. The door closed behind me. I stood in the corridor and breathed the climate-controlled air of floor 17, and the city was 53 floors above me, and Adrian Kane was somewhere in it, watching a camera feed, knowing I'd found the room. I pressed the elevator button. I went up. Chapter 2: The Confession at 3 a.m. Violet. The 42nd floor. His office at 3 in the morning was different from his office in daylight. The building was quiet in the specific way of very tall buildings at night. The quiet of height, of insulation, of the kind of silence that only exists when you are far above the noise. The lights in the office were low, the desk lamp on, the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a field of cold light. He was standing at the window when I came in, of course he was, and he turned when he heard the door. He looked like he hadn't slept. This was so unusual, so contrary to the image I'd built of him in 9 weeks, the controlled, composed, always assembled version, that the sight of it did something to my chest that I didn't want to examine. His collar was open. His sleeves were rolled. He had the look of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and has spent the waiting hours in the particular limbo of someone who cannot act and cannot rest. I know, he said before I'd said anything. No, you do, I said. The camera, he nodded. He moved toward the seating area, 2 chairs and a low table, the configuration of a room designed for difficult conversations, and sat, which surprised me because Adrian Kane stood in most situations that were emotionally charged. Sitting felt like a concession, like choosing to be on equal ground. I sat across from him. The silence lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then he said, "Her name is Alina Vasic. We were together for 2 years, 4 years ago. She ended it, her decision, cleanly. We stayed. I thought of it as friends, though I understand that's a complicated word given the circumstances." He was looking at the table between us, not avoiding my gaze, processing, the way he processed difficult things by looking at a neutral surface while he assembled the words. 14 months ago she was diagnosed. Advanced. The prognosis was, he stopped. The prognosis the first oncologist gave her was 4 to 6 months. Room was very quiet. I found a different oncologist, he said. A team, actually, the best available. I funded the treatment. Alina had no family, very little money. She'd been a painter her whole life, the way you are, the way that means brilliant and broke. She had no infrastructure for what she was facing. So you became the infrastructure, I said. I became whatever she needed me to be. He looked up. 8 months ago, I discovered that the care facility she was in had a problem. A staff member. Someone whose motives were not. He stopped again, his jaw tightening. I moved her here. I converted floor 17. I brought her medical team to her. I made it safe. Told no one. Telling people creates vulnerabilities. Alina's situation is her immigration status, her medical history, the nature of the treatment she's receiving. There are people who would use that information in ways that would harm her. I couldn't allow that. I looked at him. At the careful face, the controlled voice, the measured explanation. And underneath all of it, underneath the strategic framing and the precise language, the thing that was also true, a man who had not left, who had not found the compassionate but final exit that most people would have taken and felt entitled to take, who had instead rebuilt an entire floor of a 42-story building into a safe place for a woman he was no longer in love with, because she had nowhere else to be and because leaving was not something he knew how to do when the leaving would cost someone something real. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because," he said, "the moment I tell you, you have to decide what to do with it, whether it changes things, whether I am," he paused, "whether what I am is something you can be near." Word he'd carefully not said sat in the room between us. "You were protecting yourself," I said. "Not just her." A long pause. "Yes." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Not the confessions about the photographs, not the explanation of the engineered meeting. Those had been admissions under pressure, the truth extracted by confrontation. This was different. This was the offered truth, the voluntary one, the kind that costs more because no one forced it. I looked at him for a long moment. "She's extraordinary," I said. "Alina, her work." Something shifted in his face. "She is." "Told me you're not her lover, that you haven't been for 3 years. He met my eyes. "That's true." "Also told me you're a good man in the way that matters, the way that costs something." Silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "She's more generous than I deserve," he said quietly. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she knows you better than you know yourself." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something open and difficult, and underneath it a question he hadn't asked yet, a question the entire room was oriented around, the question that had been building for 9 weeks of studios and glass and Saturday roads and a key card and a sketchbook. I made him ask it. Not because I was cruel, but because some things need to be said aloud to be real. "Does this change things?" he said, low, direct. "Between us." I thought about Alina's red paint. About the photographs in a cream folder. About an elevator malfunction and a wrong floor and a man who stood at windows because he was afraid of the rooms behind him. I thought about salvage. About what you make from what you couldn't save. "It changes how I understand you," I said. "It doesn't change what I stopped, chose more carefully. It doesn't change what's been building, no." The breath he released was very quiet, but I heard it. "Violet." "Don't," I said. "Not tonight. Tonight we've both had enough. Tomorrow we go to the studio and work, and this." I gestured at the space between us, at the night, at everything we'd said and hadn't said. "This happens at the speed it happens, without either of us engineering it." A pause, then with something that was almost a smile. "Without engineering." "Without engineering," I confirmed. I stood. He stood. We were 3 feet apart in a quiet office at 3 in the morning, and the city was enormous beyond the windows, and everything felt very specific and very alive. "Go to sleep, Adrian," I said. "You too," he said. I left. In the elevator going down, I pressed my back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and breathed, and the city fell away beneath me floor by floor. And by the time I reached the lobby, I had assembled enough composure to walk through it without my hands shaking. They shook in the cab home. That was all right. Some things are allowed to shake. Chapter 3: What changes and what doesn't. Violet. The following weksi went back to Alina the next day. Not sure she expected me. She was at her canvas when I knocked. The door was unlocked. She told me the day before that she rarely locked it, and she turned with the same calm, unhurried attention she'd shown the first time. I brought coffee from the cart on the ground floor and a new sketchbook, because I'd noticed the night before that she was almost through hers. I set both on the table. She looked at them. She looked at me. "Not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" Someone threatened. A pause. Someone who would have questions, ultimatums. The kind of woman who, finding out about me, would make the situation about herself. "Maybe I'm making it about myself right now," I said. "By being here." She considered this seriously. I was learning that Alina Vasic did most things seriously, with a directness of engagement that was itself a kind of intimacy. "No," she said. "You're being here because you want to understand. That is different." I sat. She poured me coffee. We talked for an hour, not about Adrian, not about illness, but about the work. About painting and installation, and the specific problem of making things that last from materials that don't. She'd been thinking about salvage herself. She said she'd been thinking about it since she'd moved into the building and seen the studio above her through the camera feed Adrian had set up, which allowed her to see the building she couldn't walk through. "I watched you work," she said. "From the feed." Adrian showed me the studio before you arrived. He was eager for me to understand what you did, why he'd chosen you. She tilted her head slightly. He showed me your piece, the one from March, the glass and the salvaged windows. He stood very still watching it. Stood very still, I repeated. Adrian stands still in front of things that move him, she said. It is how you know. Most people lean toward what they love. He goes very quiet. I thought about him in my studio, very still in front of the old glass samples. I thought about the room at the Crest in the doorway going still. He does, I said. She looked at me with something that was warm in a complicated way, the warmth of someone who has been watching a story from a distance and is glad to see it moving in a good direction, even if their own chapter in it is painful. He has been alone for a very long time, she said. Not lonely, he would argue against that word, but alone. Building things, controlling things, keeping people at the precise distance that prevents damage. A pause. You are the first person I have seen him let pass that distance, in all the years I've known him. That terrifies me, I said honestly. Good, she said. It should. He is a large thing emotionally. When he gives his attention to something it is total, it can feel, she paused. It can feel like being the only thing in the world, which is beautiful, and also, a lot, I said. A lot, she agreed. We were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city made its permanent noise. Is he the reason you're still alive? I asked. The treatment, your prognosis. Alina's expression went through something careful and arrived somewhere honest. The oncologist is the reason, she said. The treatment is the reason, but she looked at the window. There were 3 months at the beginning where I had decided to stop. The odds were very poor and I was very tired, and stopping felt like the more reasonable choice. She picked up her brush, turned it in her hands. He sat with me for 11 hours, she said. In the hospital room, he didn't argue, he didn't persuade, he just sat, and at the end of the 11 hours he said, try one more treatment cycle, just one. And if it doesn't change the trajectory, you can make whatever decision you want and I will not interfere. She looked at me. The cycle changed the trajectory. Room was very quiet. He sat for 11 hours, I said. Without his phone, she said. Without his laptop. Adrian Kane, who manages 14 companies and does not sit still for 11 minutes normally, sat in a hospital chair for 11 hours because I needed someone to be present, and he was the only someone I had. I thought about a man who stood at windows because rooms sometimes felt too much, who managed his emotions with the precision of industrial equipment, who had engineered an elevator malfunction because he was afraid of a direct conversation, sitting still for 11 hours because someone needed him to. I thought, there are 2 kinds of strong. The kind that controls everything, and the kind that stays. I thought, he is both, and I am in trouble. The work changed after the night on floor 17. Not in its quality, or not only in its quality, though the installation concept took a leap in the weeks that followed that I couldn't fully account for by any technical explanation. It changed in its nature, in what it was about. I'd been thinking of the Kane Tower atrium installation as a commission, important, significant, the biggest thing I'd made, but fundamentally an external project, something I was making for rather than making from. Now it was something else. It had absorbed Alina's story, and Adrian's mother's building, and the 15 years of a man who wouldn't quit, and the specific quality of light through pre-war glass in a cold upstate room. It had become, without my deciding, a piece about staying, about what you make from the things you couldn't keep. Adrian noticed. He always noticed changes in the work before I'd articulated them. It was one of the things that had stopped being surprising and started being something I relied on. It's different, he said one afternoon, looking at the new concept sketches. The feeling of it has changed. Personal, I said. Personal how? I looked at the sketches. At the suspended glass, the reclaimed beams from the Crest's drawings I'd been studying, the light mapping I'd done based on the Crest's windows. It's about keeping what you can't keep, I said. The way you hold the shape of something after the thing itself is gone. He was quiet for a long moment. My mother would have. He stopped. I know, I said. He looked at me. Something crossed his face that I'd stopped trying to name and started simply receiving, the thing that happened when he was moved and had decided to let it show. Thank you, he said. For Alina, for going back, for you don't have to thank me, I said. She's remarkable. I would have sought her out regardless. Still, he held my gaze. It matters that you didn't. Run, I said, a pause. Most people run. Not most people, I said. The look he gave me then, I will keep that look. Not in a photograph, not in a sketchbook. In the place where you keep the things you know you'll need. Chapter for the dinner Violet, 3 weeks later, cooked. This was not something I had anticipated. Not because it seemed out of character, exactly, but because the category of Adrian Kane doing something domestic had not existed in my mental model of him, and the introduction of new data into a settled model always produces a brief, specific vertigo. He'd asked, not arranged, not organized, not presented as an inevitability, if I would stay for dinner on a Tuesday when we'd been working late in the studio going over the installation timeline, and I'd said yes before I'd finished processing whether I'd meant to, which had become something of a pattern in my interactions with him. The kitchen was on the penthouse floor, 53rd, a space I'd never been to, separate from his office, and distinct in a way that surprised me. The office was control, precision, the deliberate curation of a man who manages environments. The kitchen was something else. It was real in the way that the crest had been real, used, marked, with the evidence of someone who actually cooked in it rather than having food appear in it. The cookbook open on the counter had notes in the margins in his handwriting. I sat at the island and watched him, which he permitted with the ease of someone who has decided to let themselves be seen. And it was, I will not make more of it than it was, which was simply a person making dinner, but the simplicity of it after 9 weeks of the professional register was so startling and so ordinary that I didn't trust myself to speak for the first 10 minutes. "You look surprised," he said, without turning from the stove. "I am, slightly," I said. "Did you think I didn't eat?" "You never eat lunch," I said. "I've worked in your building for 9 weeks. I have never once seen you eat." He was quiet for a moment. "I eat alone, generally. Eating is," he paused. "I find eating in front of people performative. It requires a kind of social comfort I don't always have." I looked at his back, the set of his shoulders, the careful concentration on whatever was in the pan. "And now?" He turned to look at me over his shoulder. "Now feels different," he said simply. The city was enormous through the penthouse windows, 180 degrees of it, every direction, the grid and the river and the bridges and the lights extending to the edges of what could be seen. I'd been in tall buildings before. I'd never been in one that felt like this, like a vantage point that had been chosen rather than acquired, a place someone had put themselves deliberately to have this specific relationship with the city below. "Do you love it?" I asked. The height, he considered the question with the seriousness he brought to everything. "I find it clarifying," he said. "Things look more solvable from up here. The scale reduces the specific problems." "The specific problems that don't reduce?" A pause. "Those are the interesting ones." He brought 2 plates to the island, sat across from me. We ate pasta, something with tomatoes and herbs, deceptively simple and very good, and talked in the way I'd come to understand as his preferred mode. Not small talk, not large talk, but the specific kind of conversation that moves between subjects with the logic of association rather than agenda, following the thread of interest wherever it leads. He told me about a building in Tokyo he'd visited years ago, a temple that had been rebuilt 17 times in exactly the same form, each reconstruction using the wood of the previous structure mixed with new wood, so that the building was simultaneously ancient and recent, the same thing and different things, continuous through its own renewal. "It's the same principle," I said. "What we're doing with the crest. The materials carry the continuity. The building can be demolished and still exist inside the new one," he said, "though I didn't understand that until you put it that way." "You understood it," I said. "That's why you kept the 17th floor. That's why you couldn't demolish the room. You could have used that floor for something. You kept it because Alina is a continuity. She carries something of who you were." He looked at me across the plates and the glasses and the quiet kitchen. "When did you get so good at reading me?" he asked. "Been practicing for 9 weeks," I said. "What have you found?" The question was serious, earnest. The question of someone who genuinely wants to know what they look like from the outside, who has been so long inside the controlled version of themselves that the outside view feels like useful intelligence. I thought about how to answer. "Someone who believes in continuity above almost everything," I said. "In the persistence of things, in not letting the things that matter be erased just because erasing is easier. You've built a 15-year project around refusing to let a building be demolished. You've built a floor of your company's headquarters around refusing to let a person be alone. I stopped. "What?" he said. "You spent 11 months researching an artist and engineering an accidental meeting because you couldn't figure out how to simply walk up and say, 'I saw something you made and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it.'" Silence that followed was very complete. "No," he said quietly. "I I couldn't figure out how to say that. I'm saying it back to you, I said. In case you want to hear it. He looked at me. The penthouse was quiet and the city blazed below us and everything between us was present and enormous and neither of us moved toward it, not yet, because some things need the approach to be the right length. I hear it, he said. He walked me to the elevator at 11. We stood in the corridor outside the penthouse door, the same corridor where 9 weeks ago nothing had existed between us and now this, and he looked at me with the full, specific attention that I had stopped trying to deflect and was simply receiving. I want to say something, he said, then say it. Been very careful, he said. About the pace of this, about not, he seemed to search. About not doing what I typically do, which is decide an outcome and move toward it with everything available to me. Noticed, I said. It's unusual behavior for you. Requires effort, he said, the almost smile. I know, I said. I want you to know that the effort is deliberate, that I am trying to let this be what it is rather than what I would make it if I were not paying attention. I looked at him. What would you make it if you weren't paying attention? A pause. Mine, he said. Immediately and completely, with no consideration for the things that consideration requires. The word hung in the corridor between us, mine, honest and alarming, and underneath both of those, something I recognized because I'd felt it too, in a different register, the same pull in a different vocabulary. Appreciate the effort, I said. Appreciate your patience with the process, he said. I pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. I stepped in, turned. He was standing very still, looking at me, with the expression of someone watching something they want and have decided, for now, to let remain at distance. Good night, Adrian, I said. Good night, he said. The doors closed. I leaned against the elevator wall and thought about mine and immediately and completely and the careful, deliberate effort of a man who knew his own intensity and was choosing, for the first time in his life perhaps, to hold it back. I thought about what would happen when he stopped holding it back. The elevator went down and I thought about it all the way to the lobby. Chapter 5, Marcus Varden's Question, Violet. The following week the call came through Nora on a Thursday morning, which should have been the first sign. Marcus Varden would like to have lunch with you, Nora said, with the particular neutrality she reserved for things she had opinions about that weren't hers to share. With me specifically, I asked. With you specifically. He said it concerns the installation project. He asked that you not mention the invitation to Mr. Kane. The pause Nora took after this last sentence was very precisely calculated, long enough to communicate that she'd noted the instruction, short enough to maintain plausible neutrality. What would you do? I asked her, another pause. I would go, she said, and I would tell Mr. Kane afterward. I went. Varden's Club was the kind of place that had no sign outside. Its address was known to the people who needed to know it and invisible to everyone else, which was itself a statement. He was already at the table when I arrived, with the proprietary ease of a man in a room that considered him a fixture. He ordered for both of us without asking. I let this happen because I was there to listen, and people who order for you are telling you who they think they are. The first 20 minutes were the kind of conversation that exists to establish that a different conversation is coming. The project, the timeline, the general health of the board's enthusiasm for the renovation. I responded accurately and without volunteering anything, which was a skill I'd developed over 10 weeks in Adrian's building. Then Varden set down his fork and looked at me with the specific directness of someone who has decided the preamble is complete. Be frank with you, Ms. Hayes. I've been on the board of Kane Capital for 11 years. I've watched Adrian operate in that time with a great deal of admiration and a small amount of concern. He is exceptional. He is also singular, in ways that can be difficult for the people around him. I appreciate the context, I said. What's the concern? Varden's mouth curved, not warmly. The concern is what happens to the people who become important to Adrian Kane. There is a pattern, very close attention. Enormous resources directed toward a person, and then a kind of absorption. The person becomes part of his world in a way they didn't anticipate and can't easily reverse. I looked at him. You're describing his business acquisitions. I'm describing his personal ones as well, Varden said. There was a woman several years ago, an artist, interestingly enough. Things did not. Her name was Alina Vasic, I said. The silence was gratifying. Varden had not expected that. You know about her, he said. I know her, I said. We've had coffee. She's remarkable. Her prognosis has improved significantly in the last 6 months. I picked up my water glass. Is there something specific you wanted to tell me, Mr. Varden? Because the general concern about Adrian's intensity is something I'm capable of assessing for myself. Varden looked at me for a long moment, something recalibrated behind his eyes. Board, he said, has concerns about the degree to which Mr. Kane's personal interests are influencing the renovation project. The scope has expanded significantly from the original brief. The budget has increased by 40%, and the primary contractor relationships all run through Kane personally rather than through the company structure. The project is more ambitious than originally scoped, I said. Ambitious projects cost more. That's not a personal interest, that's architecture. Crest, Varden said. The word landed like a stone. I don't know what you're referring to, I said. My voice was even, I was proud of it. A property in upstate New York, Varden said. Designed by Marguerite Kane. Adrian has been pursuing its preservation for 15 years at personal expense. There are indications that materials from that property are now being incorporated into the Kane Tower installation. I looked at him across the table and understood several things simultaneously. That Varden knew more than he should. That someone in the project had been sharing information they shouldn't have. That this lunch was not concern, it was intelligence gathering. I think, I said, that this conversation is over. I stood. I set my napkin on the table with the precision of someone who has made a decision and is enacting it without drama. MS. Hayes, Varden said, and his voice had changed, the social warmth gone, something harder underneath. Adrian Kane is going to hurt you, not because he intends to, because it is what he does. The people he keeps end up diminished, absorbed, unable to function outside his orbit. I am telling you this because you seem intelligent enough to hear it. You're telling me this, I said, because you want to know how much I know about something, and I'm not going to tell you. I picked up my bag. Good afternoon, Mr. Varden. I walked out of the club into the cold November street and stood on the pavement and thought about what he'd said, not the warning which I'd expected, but the information inside it. Someone was reporting to Varden. Someone inside the project. Someone close enough to know about the crest. I called Adrian before I reached the corner. He answered on the second ring. Violet! I just had lunch with Marcus Varden, I said. He knows about the crest. He has someone inside the project reporting to him. You need to know that. Silence on the line was short and very cold. Are you all right? I'm fine. He didn't threaten me. He was trying to gather information and warn me off simultaneously. Where are you? East 67th. Stay there, he said. I'll come to you. Minutes, he said. The line went quiet. He was there in 4. Chapter 6 controlled Bern Violeth arrived in the gray car, and he got out, and he walked toward me on East 67th Street with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, not anger, which I'd expected, and not the controlled assessment I was used to, but something more elemental. The expression of someone for whom a threat to someone they care about has bypassed every layer of professional management and is registering directly. He stopped in front of me. He looked at me, the full inventory look, quick and complete, checking. He didn't touch you, he said, not a question. He had lunch with me, I said. He didn't threaten me. Adrian? I know what Varden does with information, he said. I know what he does with people who have information. You need to tell me everything. We sat in the car. I told him everything, the word for word of it, as accurately as I could reconstruct, while he listened without interrupting, his face very still, his eyes on the middle distance. This was how he received difficult information, the complete stillness, the processing, the containment of reaction until the information was complete. When I finished, he was quiet for 20 seconds. Then, he has someone in the architectural firm, he said. The crest information came from the documentation I commissioned from their team last month. That's the only place it could have come from. What does he want? Varden has wanted a stake in the Kane Tower project since the renovation was announced. I've declined twice. His jaw tightened. He's looking for leverage, for something he can use to make the negotiation less optional. The crest, I said. If he knows it's connected to your mother, he knows it's emotional leverage. Alina turned to look at me. He mentioned her. By implication. He said there was a woman, an artist, several years ago. He didn't know I knew who she was. Something dangerous moved through his expression, not rage, which would have been less alarming, but something colder and more purposeful. The particular expression of a man who has decided that something requires addressing and has already begun the address in his head. If he goes near Alina, he started. He won't, I said. He doesn't know where she is. That's still protected. He was fishing. was fishing with you as the rod, he said. I know, I didn't give him anything. He looked at me for a long moment. The street moved outside the windows, indifferent, and the car was very quiet, and his expression had shifted, the danger still there, but something else moving through it now, the recognition of what had just happened. I'd walked into a room alone with someone who meant him harm, identified the threat, extracted information, and called him. Without panic, without being managed. You handled it well, he said. I handled it the way I handle things, I said, straightforwardly. Aware, a pause. I'm not accustomed to that from people in my, he stopped. Orbit, I offered, the almost smile. Orbit, he drove me back to the tower. In the elevator, side by side, he said, I'm going to deal with Varden. I know, I said. I don't want to know how. It won't be anything that requires you not to know, he said. I'm not that kind of dealing. I know that too, I said. The elevator opened on 18. I stepped out, turned, he was looking at me from inside the elevator, the doors holding open, the building waiting. His expression was the unguarded one, the one I kept. Thank you, he said, for calling me immediately. You're the person I call, I said simply. That's where we are. Doors closed. I stood in the corridor outside my studio and thought about you're the person I call and how simply I'd said it and how completely I'd meant it. Somewhere in the last 10 weeks, without my deciding and without his engineering, something had become true. The only remaining question was what we were going to do about it. Chapter 7, the night it changes Violet, 11 weeks in. Friday night he came to the studio at 7:30 on a Friday night. This was not unusual. He came when he came, on no fixed schedule, and Friday evenings had become, over the course of 11 weeks, less professional and more something else. The way time in close proximity reconfigures itself, the professional edges softening, the personal spaces expanding into them. But this Friday was different from the beginning. I'd been working late, alone in the studio with the city going dark outside the windows, the installation mock-up filling the center of the room, suspended glass, reclaimed timber from the Crest's architectural drawings reproduced in the fabricator's prototypes. The whole thing lit from within by the specific light I'd been chasing for 11 weeks. It was close. It was the closest it had ever been to the thing I was trying to make, and standing in front of it at 7 o'clock I'd felt for the first time the particular certainty that it would work, that the actual finished version would be what I was reaching for. I was still standing in it, inside the installation, when he came in. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the work, at the glass and the light and the timber, at the shapes it made, and he went very still. I watched him from inside the light. He stood for a long time, long enough that the light moved slightly as the city's ambient illumination shifted outside, and the shadows inside the installation shifted with it, and the whole thing breathed the way I'd designed it to breathe. Then he walked into it, into the installation. He walked through the hanging glass, and the light fractured around him and moved across his face and his coat, and he stopped in the center of it, the same center I'd been standing in, and looked up. I had not seen him look up before. In 11 weeks he had looked out at the city, at the work, at me, but not up, not with the openness that looking up requires, the absence of horizon, the sky above the glass. He looked up for a long time. When he looked back down, I was in front of him. I'd moved without deciding to 3 steps through the hanging glass, and now we were 2 feet apart inside the installation, the light moving around us both, and his face was the most unmanaged I'd ever seen it. It's her, he said. His voice was very quiet. The way the light moves, it's exactly, he stopped. She used to say the light at the Crest was alive, that it had memory, that old glass held the light differently because it had been used. It does, I said. It does hold it differently. You understood what she meant. I think I understood it before I knew where it came from, I said, which is maybe why you, I stopped. Why I what? Why you stood in front of my work in March for 11 minutes, I said. Because I was already speaking the same language, before you told me what the language was. He looked at me. The light moved between us. Yes, he said. Exactly that. We were very close. The installation was not large. Standing in its center put you within a few feet of the hanging elements, within reach of the glass, within the full effect of the light. Close enough that I could see the detail of his expression in a way I usually couldn't, the things the controlled distance obscured. Close enough that the 11 weeks of careful management, his and mine both, felt like a very thin membrane. Violet, my name in his voice, the first name register, the thing that meant the careful management had given way. I know, I said. I haven't said anything yet. You don't have to, I said. I know what you're going to say. I've known for 3 weeks. Then why? Because some things need to be said, I said. Say it. Light moved. The glass made its small, suspended sounds. The city was enormous and indifferent beyond the windows. In love with you, he said, quietly, without ceremony. The way he said the truest things, simply, directly, without the performance that would have made it easier to deflect. Have been for longer than I've let myself know. Since March, probably. Since a gallery where I stood still in front of something you made and understood, for the first time in a very long time, that there was someone who saw the world the way I needed it to be seen. Installation breathed around us. I know that is a large thing to say. I know my history makes it complicated. I know what I am and what I do and the ways that being close to me can. I put my hand against his chest, not aggressively. Gently, the flat of my palm against the lapel of his coat, the simplest possible gesture of interruption, of presence, of I hear you and I'm here. He went very still. I know what you are, I said. I've been studying you for 11 weeks. I know the cameras and the locked floors and the engineered meetings and the 11 hours in a hospital chair and the 15 years of refusing to quit and the way you go still in front of the things that move you. I looked at him. I know you, and I'm still here, and I'm not here because I'm trapped or managed or absorbed. I'm here because I chose to be. Silence was complete. That's the part I couldn't believe, he said. That it was a choice. It's always been a choice, I said. He covered my hand with his hand warm over mine, holding it against his chest, and I could feel his heartbeat through the layers of coat and shirt, faster than his composed exterior suggested, the evidence of what he contained. He kissed me, not dramatically. Not the consuming, claiming kiss I might have anticipated from everything I knew about his intensity. He kissed me the way he'd been restraining himself for 11 weeks. Carefully, precisely, the full measure of his attention in it. The way he did everything that mattered, with absolute presence. The light moved through the old glass around us. The city went on being the city below. And in the center of a thing I'd made from salvage and light and the materials of what couldn't be kept, with the taste of 11 weeks of careful restraint finally released, I thought, this is what it is. This is the thing itself. Everything else was the approach. When he pulled back, his forehead was against mine and his eyes were closed and his hands were at my face with the careful, specific reverence of someone handling something they know is irreplaceable. Violet, he said. I know, I said. I'm going to want... I know, I said. So will I. He opened his eyes, looked at me. And you're not afraid of that. I thought about it, honestly. For perhaps 3 seconds, with his hands still at my face and the light moving around us and 11 weeks of accumulated knowing between us. I'm terrified, I said. But I'm here anyway. Something in his face, something enormous and carefully kept, moved into a different position. Not released, not gone, but rearranged the way furniture is rearranged to make a room work better. Still the same things, same weight, but configured now around a different center. Then we're both terrified, he said. Good, I said. It should feel like something, he smiled. A real one, not the controlled brief allowance, not the almost smile I'd catalogued for 11 weeks. A real smile, full and unguarded, the face of a man who has set down something very heavy and is still adjusting to the lightness. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen since I walked into his building. Epilogue to Part 3. What Varden knows Marcus Varden. The same night had known about the girl on the 17th floor for 2 weeks. Not everything. Not the specifics of her condition. Not the details of the arrangement. Not the name of the medical team Adrian had assembled with the quiet efficiency of a man who had decided that a problem required solving and had simply solved it. But enough. Enough to know she was there. Enough to know what she meant to Adrian's decision-making, the soft center in the controlled man, the place where loyalty overrode strategy. The question was what to do with it. Varden was not cruel. He wanted it noted, at least in his own accounting, that he was not cruel. He did not want to harm the woman. He did not want to harm anyone. What he wanted was leverage, and leverage was a neutral instrument. It could be used delicately or not, depending on the circumstances. He wanted the stake in Kane Tower. He'd wanted it for 2 years. It was a reasonable want, a business want, the ordinary desire of a man who had been on a board for 11 years and had watched that board become increasingly decorative while Adrian Kane made every decision that mattered. The project was extraordinary. The renovation would be historic. And Varden had watched from his seat on the periphery, while a woman he'd met twice became the person Adrian Kane drove 3 hours north on a Saturday and cooked dinner for on a Tuesday night. The woman was the variable. Adrian could withstand almost anything: legal pressure, financial maneuver, the standard instruments of competitive business. He'd proven that over a decade. But the woman on the 17th floor was the kind of thing that made otherwise invulnerable people make decisions they shouldn't. And now there was the artist. Varden poured himself a drink and stood at his window, not as high as Adrian's, not 53 floors, just 14, but sufficient, and thought about the way Adrian had looked at her at the dinner. The way the room had reconfigured itself around the dynamic between them the moment she'd walked in. He thought about what she'd said at lunch. I know her. We've had coffee, he thought. She is more inside this than I understood, he thought, which means she is either an obstacle or a tool. He thought Adrian Kane's greatest vulnerability has always been the people he cannot leave, the people he stays for, the 11-hour vigil, the converted floor, the 15-year preservation fight. He does not abandon, he cannot. It is the best thing about him. Varden set down his glass. It was also, he thought, the thing that would end him. He picked up his phone, dialed a number he'd been saving for a specific circumstance. The call was answered on the third ring. Have a project for you, Varden said. It requires discretion, the kind you specialize in. A pause on the line. Then, what kind of project? I need to know everything about Alina Vasic, Varden said. Medical records, current location, current condition, everything, and I need it without Adrian Kane knowing I'm looking. Another pause. That's a sensitive target, the voice said. Kane has security around that situation that is not standard. I know, Varden said. That's why I'm calling you. He hung up. He looked out at the city. 14 floors up. Ordinary in every way. A man with ordinary wants making an ordinary call in an ordinary room. On the 42nd floor of Kane Tower, the lights were still on. On the 18th floor, a studio held a suspended installation of old glass and salvaged wood, and two people stood inside it in the light, and did not know that the thing they were building, the fragile, hard-won, 11 weeks of careful approach thing, had just been noticed by someone who knew exactly how to take things apart. End of Part 3. Cliffhanger. The medical file arrived at Varden's office on a Monday. Alina Vasic. Floor 17, Kane Tower. Treatment protocol. Contact list. And at the bottom, one additional item the investigator had included. A visitor log from the building's security system, cross-referenced against the 17th floor access card records. Violet Hayes had been on that floor 11 times in the past 3 weeks. 11 times. Varden read the file twice. Then he picked up his phone and made a different call, not to his investigator, but to a journalist who specialized in the private lives of public billionaires. A journalist who had been trying to get inside Adrian Kane's world for 3 years. I have a story for you, Varden said. A woman, a secret floor, and the one man in New York every own has been trying to break open for a decade.